Today we're going to be talking about how manual testers can break into automation without having programming skills. So as a first check, can someone please respond to let me know they can see my screen and hear me? I just need one. Perfect. Thank you very much for the feedback. Okay, so just a quick housekeeping rule that I will take questions at the end. I'll be monitoring our questions and answering pane, so if there's any questions, please feel free to ask. But without further ado, I'm going to jump into the presentation, I should say. So to start on this, here's the agenda. We're going to take a look at the test automation industry, kind of recap of where it was, and then we're going to also take a look at the outlook for automation. So we're going to do the mapping of where it was and where it's going and where it's headed and why. We're going to look at an automated test lifecycle methodology and how that maps to a standard waterfall SDLC that you may see. We're going to next jump into the three categories of supporting and working in test automation, again, for those without having programming knowledge, and broken up into the categories of preparation, execution, and analysis. Within those three categories, there's 9 areas, 3 in each, for manual testers that you can work in right away in automation to support your automation professionals without having the programming skills. And then finally, a session recap. So going into the industry recap here, we saw that the first record and playback tools appeared about 20-25 years ago, thereabouts. There were primarily four big players in this market, and that was Rational, Mercury, Segway, Empirix, and probably CompuWare as well. They focused on desktop applications because that was the only technology. And some tools they could test broken URL links, but that was about it. Not digging into any of the objects at all. The tester was required to have scripting or programming knowledge to make the test work, even in record and playback. So they did find, though, that there were limitations just with the record and playback, and it really wasn't effective, that they had to really do a lot of coding to make that work. So here's an evolution of the frameworks, though, that we saw from that. All right, so first we had record and playback tools. Then it moved into more structured testing, invoking more conditions. Again, putting in some programming to make that record and playback work a little bit more robust. Next, you found a data-driven test where they extracted the data outside of the testing logic to make sure that they could store that externally. There was an evolution from that to be more of a keyword-driven approach. So on the event for the control that you're working with, so if it's mouse click or what event that you can interact with that control for, and the data that could drive that, that was more of a keyword-driven approach. It started to get into more of a model and object-based as well to make sure that the object recognition was much more object-oriented as opposed to coordinate-based. And then finally, more of an actions-based model where they tried to make it more, tools tried to make it more structured like a manual test. So to really try to bridge that gap to where the record and playback somewhat fell short, seeing that there was coding needed. Tools tried to make sure that they had more of an actions-based table that could interact with the system under test. Last, some people created their own frameworks for a hybrid. Again, combining at least more than 2 frameworks. So maybe they had an action-based with a data-driven model. A lot of custom frameworks built. So an outlook for this. The number of test automation tools, though, have increased to over 25-30, primarily focused on taking the scripting and programming out of the equation for the manual testers. Instead of having just the desktop applications, now we take a look at the following: desktop, web, mobile. So for that one test that you may have to run this across Chrome, Firefox, IE 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and those same tests that could take you a good amount of time Now let's jump into mobile. How about for all the mobile devices, all your Android devices that you may have, all your iOS devices? That same series of tests now, the permutations could be endless. So that certainly is a complexity that a lot of automation can certainly benefit, but it has to be taken a serious consideration here of where you want to run this. We now find that license models for tool, they offer a test execution only. So before there were solutions that just had the full developer mindset or the create mindset. But there's some tools now that have the solution to say, you're going to have some people who want to record their tests as opposed to those who want to play back their tests, thus kind of breaking it out to a test automation team versus those who are just functional testers that want to execute what the test automation team has delivered. They also have the capability to integrate with various continuous integration tools and test management solutions. This is a must for vendors to make sure that they integrate with existing test management processes, whether that's HPQC, MTM, or any other test management solution that you may be using, or especially with the continuous integration tools of Bamboo, Jenkins, TeamCity, TFS, what have you. So an automation tool should be able to plug right into the CI layer and to the test management layer without interrupting any of your existing processes. All right, let's go through a review of an automated test lifecycle methodology. This is an illustration from the book Automated Software Testing of how an ATLM activities interact with SDLC activities. All right, so I'm just going to go through this quick. This part is just your standard SDLC activities, the process where you have analysis requirements, you have then go into some small tool, pilot or prototype design development, testing, and production and maintenance. So if we took a look at that, let's talk about how the automated test lifecycle methodology maps in. So your first decision to automate a test. So that's kicking off your system lifecycle process for that. Your test tool acquisition, well, really you're going to be driving your analysis and requirements to acquire the right tool. So that's how that ties in. You're going to make sure that you have the proper, it's met your technology requirements, any people or personnel, easy to use requirements, anything. But that's how you acquire your tool is based on that analysis and requirements. You're going to use for the small tool pilot and prototype, you're introducing your automated testing process because now you have this tool that you want to introduce to your organization. From the design and development perspective, that's mapping in, that's not traditional development as we know it from a coding perspective. That maps into the test planning and design. So this is more taking testing up a notch into more design mode for your automated tests. Next, your integration and test. That's execution of the management of tests that you're going to have. Finally, the production and maintenance. That maps into the program review and assessment of how your test automation initiative has gone thus far. All right, categorizing the areas required for test automation. These are grouped into activities for 3 areas: preparation, execution, and analysis. So within preparation, planning your test automation activities into your testing process. What does that mean? So you have an existing test process. How do you have your test automation activities just seamlessly flow in? Creating data sheets or SQL statements for data driving your tests. How can you immediately provide value for knowing the data in your system under test and giving that to the test automation professional? Editing existing manual test cases for automation so that we know that there's going to be a number of manual test cases that may or may not have been written with automation in mind. So for those that we do want to automate from our manual testing perspective, how do we edit those and what fields are important to edit to make sure that they are automation ready? All right, from an execution perspective, learning how objects are recognized within test automation. If there's going to be 9 points here, there's 3 in There's 3 in the preparation, 3 execution, and 3 in the analysis. All these are areas that people can jump into right away, but this first point, learning how objects are recognized, especially from a manual testing perspective, when I get to that slide, manual testers, if you don't have automation experience, this is really important. This is one of the most important concepts to grasp that will really bond you with your automation team. Working with the object repository and organizing this. Building test automation actions from the ground up. Again, these are all areas where a manual tester can jump into right away. Some maybe with the help and a little guidance of an automation professional. If you were new to automation and you don't have an automation team, then certainly working with the vendor, such as Ranorex, as what we're doing here, will work with anyone, the manual testers, to make sure that they're automation ready. All right, now on to the analysis. Adding error handling into your testing workflow. So when we're writing our manual tests, we're not necessarily considering that if I get a pop-up for a meeting reminder from Outlook or an antivirus update, typically we'll just click the OK or dismiss and move on. But to an automation tool, that's big news, and that's a big stopping point if you don't have your error handling worked into your tests. Knowing how to step into test cases and debug. So we have this now concept that we don't only have, if we find a bug, it may not be a bug in the application that we're testing. It could be a bug within our test cases, our automated test cases that we've developed. So we first have to rule that out before opening a bug to our development team. Last is reading the report results and interpreting this. How do we understand, how do we read the reports, and what information do we gather from that? Okay, so let's jump into these areas. The 9 areas for manual testers to work on. Test automation activities. What I did here is take a very simple V model of just your SDLC activities mapped to test activities. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this because we have a lot of, I'm sure, very seasoned testing professionals. But I just have here my project initiation mapped to my test strategy. The analysis portion mapped to scenarios. Design is mapped to my test cases. My development is mapped to my test scripts. Testing is mapped to test results. So these are the artifacts that are delivered for that SDLC activity. These are the testing artifacts, let me emphasize, mapped to that SDLC activity, a typical waterfall one. Well, what I'd like to fill in is that middle part on what are the automation activities that help drive the project initiation with the test strategy. So let me jump right in. The project initiation, let's outline the scope of automation in the release test plan. So why not look at, you do want to have, it's best practice to have your automation initiative as a one-off, off to the side, to make sure that you can emphasize or make sure you plan some time for that. But why not put that in your release test plan? Because you should have some portions in there to say, what automated tests are you running? Which ones are you going to create for that specific release? Work with your functional test team on that. And for the functional testers, work with your automation professionals to get the scope of what they're going to be doing for that release. Divide test scenarios, automated versus manual. You may have more of a perspective now of how many scenarios you can do that are automated versus manual. But it's good, at least at this point now, just from a test scenario perspective, just to earmark, at least to get an understanding of which ones you want to automate, which ones that you're going to do manually. Manual testing, we all know, will never go away, but hopefully it will limit, the number of permutations will be drastically limited, and you're emphasizing on the right ones because the automated tests are doing the more labor-intensive ones. From a design perspective, prepare the automated test workflow with error handling. So that's something to consider now in your test cases for your new and regression, to make sure you're incorporating error handling into these test cases right from the start. From now, we're going to start to develop those test scripts. Record your modules, ensuring all the objects have been recognized. So that's a key key component to make sure that, there's so many times that we get questions or even from any tool perspective. I record my test and it's not playing back what I just recorded. How come? Well, let's take a look at what objects have been recognized. Testing. We're going to replay this until the test executes as expected. So there's so many times, right? We've seen that where the testing life cycle, the automated testing life cycle, takes longer to implement than a manual test case. That's because we're replaying it and retweaking it and constantly making sure that it's as robust as possible. And once we get it to that point, now we can safely run this without it breaking. And then finally, checking into our configuration management tool or our source code tool to make sure that this development artifact that we have created, again, an automated test is a development artifact for our purposes. We were making sure that this does stay evergreen. All right, so jumping into the next section of preparation, creating data sheets or SQL statements for data driving your automation. If I just had a little form here, say my application, it's got a login field, it's got a password field. I may do a SQL data retrieval to say select all from logins where login type equals manager, because now I want to make sure I test with a manager, I want to test with a supervisor, I test with an analyst, all the different permutations of what rights it could come up to. Where this helps my automation professional as me as the manual tester, I'm supplying the data. My automation professional just needs to make sure that they put in the right hook from the data piece I need. I don't expect them to know my relational database on the back end that's tied to this and all the tables and corresponding fields. They don't have to know that. They just have to know how they can tie in to either an Excel spreadsheet or to my data tables to make sure that I can pass that SQL along and it's going to give me what I need. From an Excel example, I may supply this to my automation professional. That I give them Excel that has a login ID field, a password field, and just for reference what the login type is. Again, this automation professional is going to be the one required to make sure that it can map that login ID from the Excel into the login ID field in my application under test. And same with the password. So to iterate through that. My job as the manual tester is to make sure I provide this data in the format that they need. Okay, so a simplified data-driven setup in an automation solution. Create a variable on what you want to data drive. So first, when we get to this form, look at that login ID and say that field, that edit box, I want a data drive. The password field, I want a data drive. So I'm going to create a variable. Instead of typing in a specific test user 1, I'm just going to type in user. And that's my variable or my password. Again, login password potentially. That's my variable that I want to start to pass that login ID, that password, or my SQL data retrieval into that variable. Next is I want to link my data source to where the data is going to be. So if I want to keep this on my hard drive or if I want to keep this on a network drive, say this Excel spreadsheet or a CSV, link it to that source so every time it runs, that connection is always open looking at that Excel spreadsheet or looking at that CSV or SQL. Then last, map your data source columns to the defined variables. So once I have my data source, I got my Excel example mapped in as my data source, now I just need to map the field of login ID from Excel into login ID for my application. So just 3 simple steps that should work with any solution that you're working with. This is a simplified approach on what you should be looking for. It should be this simple. All right, editing existing manual test cases for automation. I took just a generic test case template from the internet. Let's look at some fields in here though. So for those, if you're not using the manual editors from, say, Rational Quality Manager, HP Quality Center, or Microsoft Test Manager, if you are using Excel, let's take a look at some fields that we have here. This is probably pretty similar to what you're seeing. We have your steps, the test steps, which with some verbiage in it, what the test data is, expected result, the actual result, the status of it, and some notes. Truly though, in your test case template, there's only two fields that you really need to worry about. And that's just concentrating on test steps and the test data. And that's it. Test steps. Limit the verbiage to just actions and events. So mouse, click, key sequence, value. When you limit to that, it's a lot easier for the automation tool and a lot easier to port it into an automation solution when you can eliminate some of the English verbiage. The test data. Avoid hard-coding any values unless absolutely mandatory. Have it all data-driven where you can make sure you can maintain that. But in some cases, it is better to have your test data hard-coded. Again, it's better to control it in an external format. Why I said those two fields are the only important ones, the expected results, the actual results, the status, not important for your test case template on what you need to edit. Because it's a best practice to separate your results from any planning info. But more importantly, the automated tool is going to take care of that for you. When you record it, that is the expected result. And when you play it back, it will give you the actual result. And if that actual result does not map to the expected result, then it's going to give you a failed test case. So that status will populate accordingly. So the automation tool will take care of the expected results, the actual results, and then the status. Just concentrate from a manual perspective with your test case, concentrate on your test steps and your test data. All right, execution perspective. All right, so here, like I said, for manual testers, this is the most important thing. If you're new to automation, if you can get one thing out of it, it would be this. And automation professionals, I think you'll appreciate emphasizing this point to the manual testers. You see this login ID edit box, and we see this password. So from our perspective, that's where I go to type in my login ID. That's the password. However, it digs into what's called the accessibility layer, and this accessibility layer has that login ID field has all kinds of different things going on with it. So it's got color. Look, it's got the different behaviors. It's got a state of enabled equals true. It's got a value. There's even more, as you can see that scroll box in there. It's got inner text. It's got index. It's got an object name. And that's how an automation tool is looking at it. It's not looking at it just on the surface as we are as manual testers. What it's doing is digging in to say, I'm identifying that login ID by its object ID, login ID, or by its its index of 1 within the container. Its inner text could be whatever. But this is how the tools are identifying it. So if development has not turned on accessibility within their application in certain fields, then there's a problem. And so it makes it very difficult. Or if you're working with a technology that produces dynamic IDs. So for example, login ID field could be E3T7HB. What does that mean? That's a dynamic ID. So next time when you play it back, if there's a new build, it could have a new value of U8K6V. The automation tool is still referencing that first one if you don't take into account that it's a dynamic ID. And when you try to play it back, it will not play because it's identifying that field based on that name. So again, it's very important for a manual tester to know this because this is also a best practice. Not many times you won't see development put this in a design review document, but why can't they say if they're introducing new objects, tell me exactly what the naming standards are for those objects and what are static and what are dynamic. If you catch this early with your development team, this will be easy for them to help make sure that they follow any standards that you may have. So this is really more the manual testers pushing it upstream in their design reviews for their functional release. All right, working with the object repository and organizing this. All right, so I just took a snapshot of our website, which is nothing more than just, it's got some functions here of features, pricing, support, and company. And there's options within there. So just your standard website. Within features, right now we're on the features form. So if I were collecting my objects in here, again, this is just a good way for you to understand this. Work with your object spy tool or anything of the sort where you can capture what the objects are and what the objects' names are. Very good practice. Again, a manual tester can do this now. It does not take programming skills at all. If I were to take a look at the features form, just simply enough, this feature form has buttons. 2 buttons on there. It's download a free trial button and join a free webinar button. It's important to know the type of control that it is. If I were going to the pricing form, again, I'm going to break this out. I'm going to categorize it into what I have as buttons, links, or edit boxes. That's just my personal preference on how I want to organize my forms. Support forms, same thing. I'm going to go about how I can organize this into categories. So taking a look at the SPY tool, seeing how objects are identified and how you can break these out and contain these as well, very important. Building automations from actions from the ground up. All right. First thing, record all of your steps first. There's a lot of times that you may think, if I'm going to start with automation, I have to know exactly how many steps I want to have in my login. Next, I'm going to go into my administration screen. Following that, I'm going to go into my work order screen, and I'm going to know every step along the way. And this is how I'm going to have test script 1 is going to do this, test script 2 is going to do this, test script 3 is going to do that. Well, what if it doesn't go as planned? And are you going to have to go back and re-record everything? Instead, what I'm suggesting here is that record all of the steps that you want to do first. Focus on a quality recording, not naming each test case first and knowing the initial content. As long as you get a good recording down, you're fine. That works perfectly fine, and now you can go through each step and you can break those apart. So if you have steps 1 to 100, that's an end-to-end test, maybe you break those out to say test case 1 is my first 20 steps. I'm going to parse that and put that to the side to make that test case 1. 21 through 40 is test case 2, and so forth. So you'll see that, but those 100 steps that you've recorded and created, it's a quality recording. And you've recorded the objects properly, you've taken your time, and you make sure that it hit the right fields. All right, so this is a Ranorex action table. Taking a look at that, I did a recording, say, with I have some desktop, I have some web, I have some mobile. So with Ranorex, I could do it all in one, and that's what I did here. But if I wanted to just concentrate on a good quality recording, again, regardless of the tool you're using, concentrate on a good recording, I'm going to take steps 1 through 9 and make those my desktop tests. I'm going to take 10, I'm going to take them, 10 and 11, and I'm sorry, just 11. I'm going to make that as my web test, and 12 and 13 as my mobile test. So how would I look at that? Again, this is one recording I did, steps 1 through 13. My test case 1. Test case 1.1 is going to start my application. Test case 1.2 is going to add a user. Those are steps 2 through 8. And test case 3 is going to go close my application, which is step 8, 9, 10. Test case 2 is going to open my browser. That's test case 2.1. So any other test that I want to insert in, I have my structure already created. And now my mobile test, I'm going to start my application. I'm going to navigate. Anything I do within here, that's test case 3. Oh, that should say 3.1, 3.2. But you get the point that I'm breaking this out into the various areas. But I concentrated first to make sure that my first goal was steps 1 through 13 was a quality recording. And now I could break it up and slice and dice to anything I wish. Okay, now jumping into some of the analysis portions here. What happens if, to make sure that we have robust error handling, An unexpected window appears in the middle of the test. That's certainly cause for concern that we need to build some error handling in. Objects are moved, added, removed, or changed. Something happened to the objects on the screen, and now do I have to re-record my tests? Objects are delayed in appearing in the automated test run. So I think of this where I have a certain window that I'm using, I'm pulling back a large amount of data within my application. And it may take a minute to come back before that OK button is enabled. Maybe it takes 2 minutes. And that's okay for me because I know I pulled on this one, I pulled a larger data set. But if I didn't tell my tool to say wait for 60 seconds or wait till the object appears, the tool may only have, say, a 30-second or 60-second default wait for time. And it's waiting for that OK button to be enabled. And if it's not, it's going to say the test has failed. So that's where we need to make sure we understand some of the timing elements as well. Additional steps need to be added to your test automation recording. So what happens if there's additional steps needed? Now that right in the middle of the test, do I have to re-record? Our thought here at Ranrex is that if you wouldn't rewrite a manual test case, why should you have to with an automated test case? You shouldn't have to do that. We want to make sure that you should be able to just, again, with any tool, you should have the ability to just insert your steps that you want to, just like you would a manual test. So if I introduce a new control onto a form with my manual test, I'm just going to put that placeholder insert to the test case where I need to be, as opposed to saying I have to rewrite this whole test case over again. All right, so some typical options for debugging automated test cases. Debugging allows you to watch where exactly the test case may have issues. Again, so we want to make sure that the test is working properly, and that any issues we found was with the application under test. This could be with the application, or it could be with the test recording. The first thing is setting a breakpoint. So for developers, this is pretty common stuff, but for testers, you set the point on which you expect this to break. Then you choose that step. You're setting it by choosing the step for that breakpoint, and you're executing the test case to that breakpoint. Once you get to that breakpoint, you have a couple of options. You have the option to continue debugging. You can stop that process. You can step over that breakpoint. You can step into that next function of what you're going to be doing, or step out of. So you want to see, maybe I think this is a breaking point, but does the rest of the test work? Or where I want to maybe step into, I want to deep dive to see exactly when I hit a button, exactly what happens at failure point. So this is pretty common. Again, this is taken from Ranrex, but this is very common among a lot of tools, because that kind of digs into that development kind of mindset. Again, I don't have to be a programmer to understand that I'm going to set my point I'm going to set my breakpoint, run a test to a certain point where I saw it fail before, and I want to see it. I want to get it right to my application, right to the state where it's about to fail. So as I hit next step, I can see exactly what happens and what data was set on my application prior to it failing. All right, reading report results and interpreting this. So a sample manual test case includes both planning and execution steps. So I've seen this from an Excel example where they have one test case that contains everything. But an automation file results shows execution results but links to the recordings. So information in the run below that you may not see in a manual test case. System information. You're going to see execution time, the duration, machine name, operating system, dimensions. So a lot more systematic type of information, system information that you may see that is not necessarily there for your manual test. Global parameter values. The ability to jump to the failed step. The total number of iteration runs and report on each data element. A container of screenshot information along the execution. So what does it look like? Again, very standard with tools. This is just what the Ranrex report looks like. So you'll see the execution time, operating system, computer name, but you'll also see the data-driven tests, you'll see test case add entry. Iteration 1, it gave us what the data is for each one of those. So for iteration 1, it used the CSV title of WordPress demo and the such. So every iteration comes back with exactly what data was tested. So as you look at it, it'll show you where your failure was, maybe with a certain piece of data. Again, this is just a very standard report that you'll see across a lot of tools. But it's understanding this on how you can look at this and where you can interact. So a lot of tools will give you the option. We give you the option to, as you have that failed step, just right-click and go jump to step, and it'll show you where it failed within the automation test. Again, keeping in mind that it may not be a problem with the application under test. It could be a problem with your test case. Okay, so let's recap the presentation. The automation industry focused on desktop, but is driving to multi-technology stacks to cover a large amount of platforms. Again, we were looking at that, especially for the web and the mobile. You know, that's not stopping. The primary skill set for those working in automation was programming or scripting. You did have to have that. Regardless if there's tools out there that want to call it descriptive programming, it's still programming. It's still coding. So you still need to do that. But there are solutions available for those without these skills. And Ranorex is definitely one of those. Map a test automation methodology to existing SDLC or testing workflow processes. Same general structure would apply. The best ones that we've seen are those people who can, the best processes are those who have a test automation process fused into their existing functional test process. So it understands how the two sides can work together in harmony. Understand where your contributions are. So taking a look at that preparation, execution, analysis, manual testers, I will tell you today, I'm sure you can fit into one of those areas to understand. Maybe it's reading, maybe it's helping the automation folks by reading the reports and going through the results reports. That's certainly immediate value add. Maybe it's understanding the object repository and helping get a standard set of names. Maybe it's preparing the data sheets as well. So there's a lot of areas that you can contribute to automation right away. Those 9 I think are some of the more common ones. Are probably the most common ones, and I would venture to say that one of those would definitely fit for you. You review the areas where manual testers can work in, focusing on automation structure, object recognition, and results interpretation. So the automation structure that we were talking about, it's really understanding my test cases, how I'm editing these, what data I have for this, what data I have for this, and everything. So, all right. All right, with that, that is my last slide. I want to open this now up to questions, and I'd also like to put out an additional poll question out there for you. All right, so okay, so I will now take any questions that you may have. Get to the questions here. So I am going to jump into the questions. Can I briefly explain record and playback? Yes, so record and playback is just nothing more than, as you hit record, the test tool is tracking your steps on everything you're doing with your mouse and keyboard. So it's not just deciding that you want to go in the middle of your test, go check something else. You've got to be very judicious about what you're doing. Okay. For some of us, I'd love to see an iOS automation demo, an iOS simulator. So one thing I can tell you on that is that we do offer webinars. We offer webinars that we can interact with. from a mobile device perspective. From a Ranorex perspective, this is given by our technical engineering team, and I highly encourage everyone to take a look at this. They're offered typically on Tuesdays, whether you're in the European time zone is better for you, or as opposed to the Eastern time zone that we offer in. So certainly take a look at this because it's a perfect demonstration of the iOS capabilities and also allows you to interact with the Ranorex technical engineering team. But again, for those not familiar with test automation, that's okay. I will encourage you to download Ranorex. We encourage you to download Ranorex. Take a look at it. Our system uses a lot of dynamic IDs. Is that something I need to request as we add new features? I think it'd be better if development, I mean, absolutely it would be better to have at least one of the elements. You don't want to restrict your development team to have all static elements because that may be restrictive for them. You just need one. You need something that the test automation tool, it'd be ideal that they could latch onto. All right. How much programming required to automate in Ranorex if I have no previous experience in any language? I would say 0. Again, my background is all in QA myself, and I don't have a development background at all. So it would be one of those where you can get a long ways away. In Ranorex, we do offer you the ability to work in C# or VB.NET. So it's if you wanted to do some coding. But our actions table and recordings are robust that it will get you 70% of the way there, at least, of anything you wanted to do. I'm just giving that as a rough figure. It may get you close to 100%. Okay, can you do an iPhone 6 or iOS automation demo? Yes, the best way I would recommend that is to attend our mobile webinar. Again, that's given by our technical SMEs with mobile, so any questions you may have, they're going to be the best ones suited to answer that. Okay, how can we record the sequence while the software is still under development? Absolutely. One of the things to do is record what you have thus far, even if the form is not done. Because what you can do is you can just use the SPY tool for Ranorex and, as an example, add in any steps that get added along the way. So that's certainly possible. Do you have some quick intro on how to record test result externally? So right now, I would like to take any questions on that. I'm not familiar with what you're talking about there. I'd like to understand that a little better. Support for mobile. So Ranorex is one tool that is for all of your desktop applications, all your web applications, and mobile. So that is, as you saw in my test, that was a straight recording that I did from a desktop, web to mobile, all in one tool, all in one actions table. But I decided to split that out. Does Ranorex integrate with Jira? Yes, we do. There's a blog. If you were to go to ranorex.com, type in Jira, we give you the exact information on how to integrate with that. We have it as one of our blogs. What's the biggest hurdle you find in the change culture from a tester changing from manual to automation? That's a great question. I would think it's a time change and a kind of allocation change, because it is one of those where you are going to take longer to ramp up your automation, but the payoff in the end is going to be much better. But it does take longer to write your first automated test as opposed to a manual test. There's no doubt about that. What are the disadvantages of only using a record on playback tool for automation? There's some things, there's a lot there. You might be missing some test logic that you may want to do. So for example, if you wanted to send an emailed report or something out, if there's something as a post-process you want to do that's outside of the GUI of your application, that you may want to have a function written. So again, with Ranorex, you can do that as a function. You don't have to write a full, robust code module for it. It may just be a function call that you need to make. How would you define good cornerstones to see if a recording is good? So I can slice and dice up into my test cases. Great question. The objects, the object names. Within Ranorex, you can see very clear if your object names under the repository item, if it's very good or not. If the objects are good, then you're in great shape. It'll know how to navigate, but you'll be able to see that if it clicked on the right field or not within, a very short time. How does the recording on mobile devices work? It's the same, with Ranorex, it is the same process. It's the same concepts that we have our actions table or we have our recordings. With a mobile device, what happens is we instrument the device to put on a control file. So we can work with the actual device. We can work with through a USB cord, through Wi-Fi, or through emulators. Any of those options are good with Ranorex. How do we get help if your documents don't help setting up automation? So Doug, I'll be more than happy to help you with anything that any questions you may have along the way, certainly. Can we have a copy of your presentation? Yes, absolutely. This will be made. There will be follow-up that'll give you a link to the presentation, certainly. Can we get reports into an Excel spreadsheet? With Ranorex, you could. We offer a custom report editor that we give the style sheets, and we give you the ability to edit your own report template if you don't like the default one, or if you want to use something more expanded than the default one within Ranorex. So yeah, if you want to, after that, if you want to import that into Excel, you can certainly do that. Yes, you can gain. So Janine, we can certainly give you access to the PowerPoints and the recording itself. Could Ranorex do something without mouse clicking? That is possible, but you do have to go into the methods to be able to dig into that a little bit more. That is not going to be a record and playback function. All right. Sending a purchase order, so we've done evaluation briefly. There's an option for this. Any questions? Okay. How much C# should we know in order to take full advantage of Ranorex? Well, that depends. I mean, if you would rather use VB.NET, that certainly you could do that. But I would say of any programming, if you had to take full advantage, if you could understand how to write a function and how to edit a function, I say you can get a long ways with that, just because you can take your recording within Ranorex and convert your step of what you recorded into a function. All you have to do is right-click and say convert to user code, and we build the structure of that function for you. So you just may need to add in additional arguments or anything like that. You don't have to write the full structure of your test. We have a few. All right. It's not green automate test cases. All right. How would you handle pop-ups that may or may not appear before you reach the end of the automation? So within Ranorex, we have something called a pop-up watcher class, and that's for us. If there's some external pop-up that comes up, we invoke this code method that you would just have to compile into the code, and we provide all the syntax for you that we would just have to cover in. So anything that comes up, we're going to kill and move on to our test. Just dismiss that. Are you planning on having another webinar to cover other Ranorex-related topics? We actually have webinars. I invite you to please go to ranorex.com. Look at the webinars we have that specifically go over desktop and web testing with Ranorex, one on mobile testing with Ranorex, and then finally, if you've attended one or both of those, a best practices webinar that our engineers go through to tell you what are some of the best practices that you want to do with Ranorex to make your tests even more robust. So hopefully that'll answer the next question on there'll be another webinar on how to use the tool. Absolutely. That's, like I said, please go to ranorex.com and go to support. Under the support, you'll find the free webinars. or right on the main homepage of ranorex.com, you'll see the free webinars. As I can, maybe I'll open that up right now. As I go to ranorex.com, and I can go to a free webinar here, or I can go to support, and I have my free webinars as well. All right, is there a way around sensitive text? For example, Windows may display text in lowercase and Windows may display. Yeah, so Alex, you may have to have a code function to tell you how you want to handle, because it depends on how your field interprets that, if it's case sensitive, because Ranorex is going to capture that in the case that you're putting it in, or it's going to make sure it's displaying that. Is it possible to test several same windows of one program parallel with Ranorex? On one machine, it will go sequentially. So one window at a time on multiple machines, certainly. That's what Ranorex, we offer a runtime license to test that across multiple machines. But on one machine, it's going to go sequentially for how the mouse and keyboard would interact. Okay. So how can I detect the right ID when recording a DataFlex application? I would invite you to say, let's take a look. If you're using Ranorex, let's take a look through the SPY tool, spy on the given object, and see whether the field looks dynamic. If it's got a good name to it, like save or open customer, anything like that, as opposed to some random numbers and letters. That'll give you the first clue that it might be dynamic. When I run my recordings overnight, it always fails because my machine goes to sleep. So certainly that may be something where you have to adjust your machine settings so it does not go to sleep. And so the test keeps running, because it does need to be in active mode. We're moving from Selenium to Ranorex. That's a great thing to hear. Any migration process available. So the way we identify our objects is different from Selenium. So we rely on our XPath. We found that to be the most robust way to identify objects and to navigate to objects. So it's just a little different way of how we do it than Selenium. So there is no import process per se. How do we handle new objects added to a form with an existing script? Very, very simple with Ranorex. Again, once you have your existing script, open up your Ranorex SPY tool, spy on the object you want. If you right-click, you can add that to your repository. Then finally, just drag that repository item up into the line where you want to test, and now it's going to click on that field. It is a very simple three-step process that is shown in our webinars as well. Can Ranorex work with TFS? Yes, no problem. We can integrate with TFS out of the box. Where can I see previous webinars? Also today's slides. So if there's anything we're looking for from previous, I'd be more than happy to get that to you. What is the benefit of using Ranorex Studio? Is it better than using Ranorex SPY for tracking XPath? It's the same. Ranorex Studio has Ranorex SPY as well, but Ranorex Studio, you have everywhere you're going to manage and maintain your tests, as well as working with your actions table and all your module browsers. Ranorex Studio has everything. Does Ranorex integrate with MTM? Yes, we do. To MTM, we are a coded UI script. So it is the same. We're under the guise of a coded UI script, so it's pretty seamless. Can we test native apps on iOS and Android? We certainly could. If we want to get into the Android, we can do, and we're working on the iOS as well. But that's not available now. But I mean, as far as Android, we can go into the settings, working with different types of applications within there. Can the tool support for while loops without getting into C# or VB script? Right now, we are working on conditional as well. That will be something coming in Ranorex. but right now that is we do have error handling behavior as well. But if you want traditional for and while loops, that you would have to create a function for that. Okay, so you said that expected result does not count. So let me qualify that just a little bit more. On a manual test case, when we're trying to take our manual test cases back into get those ready for automation, the expected result, it doesn't matter to me because as I record it, that is my expected result. So what if we record on a software that has a wrong behavior, test, fill, and pass as long as the behavior, that's true. You will have to know what is the expected, so that could give you a false positive. So it's to understand, and as you get that is a challenge that manual tester will have to understand where that is. What if this is maybe that's something you don't want to have as a recording until it's a successful pass. I mean, it's up to you, but it's a way to know that this is going to pass, but it's actually a failure. How does test automation fit in with agile development and story testing? That's a great question because test automation is supposed to be the backbone, one of the backbones of test-driven development. So it's that whole iterative process, and you want to make sure it's not only just test automation, but the tool. Make sure that you have a test automation tool that can work well with that, because I will tell you, with using 6, 7, maybe 8 tools in my career, many tools do not. We feel at Ranorex we got a great tool that can work well with agile development. Like I said, I encourage you just to take a look at it and try it for yourself. Don't just believe what I'm saying. If we use Ranorex Recorder, how much does it make the interaction with the application slower? It makes it slower on the first recording. That is true. It needs to go slow because it's digging into every object, while us as manual testers are cruising along. Ranorex tool is digging into the objects as well. Can this tool watch? So as it's digging, I'm sorry, to finish that, as it's digging into the objects, it's tracking that information and bringing it back to Ranorex. That's why it's taking a little longer. How would Ranorex run with simulators like iOS if it doesn't work on a Mac? So we have an iOS service application and a control file that we put onto the actual device of the Mac, and we run that through Windows. So that's not a problem at all for us. Please certainly give that a try. Are there best practices available how to design test cases to reuse test elements? Yes, please attend our best practices webinar, again, given by our very good technical engineering team who will be more than happy to demonstrate this and to take any questions. Can this tool watch a folder and find it in a response file, look for a value in a grid? Yes, to do that, if you want to look anything in a grid, there is some XPath modifications. Again, that's not programming. That would have to be done to make sure you get the right data point within your grid. In opening and reading a value from a file, we certainly do that. We have properties native within our recorder for getting a value and setting a value, called get value and set value, that you can use as drop-down list options, no problem. Can we run Ranorex unattended? Certainly. It certainly can run unattended. That's no problem at all. But again, your build or continuous state integration tool will have to be the one to kick it off. Right now, we are working on a test scheduling function within Ranorex, but it's currently not there. But it's something that is on our roadmap. Does Ranorex support VB6 or older legacy code? Absolutely. We excel at that as well. As a company, we're deciding you're trialing Ranorex right now. Am I entitled to support? Absolutely. With Ranorex, you are going to get, if you download our tool for a trial, you get full support. We want to make sure that this is working perfectly for you. So you reach out to me or our technical engineering team, anyone, using me as a point of contact is fine, and I can get you to the right area. anything, please do. As you download the tool, you probably will get an email. You'll get an email from me. And we want to make sure that it's not just you understand the functionality, but we want to see that it works good in your environment before you even consider investing. Did I have this? Did I record this presentation? Yes, it's recording still right now. It's possible to change or disable the recording time. Rob, send me a question on that, or send me a little bit more information, because I'd like to understand that one a little bit more on what you mean to disable the recording time. Is it possible to combine different tests in one? Sure, certainly. You can combine different recording modules into RANRX. That's no problem at all. So this presentation will be available. Again, you'll get an email with the links to it following this. All right, so getting towards the end, I know we're a couple minutes over, and I'll take just a couple more questions. If I don't get your question, please send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to. I'll just go 2 more minutes. I use XPaths using SPY. The UI keeps on changing. What unique identifier can be used so the UI even doesn't change? If it does, well, we'd have to take a look at what looks static. That is definitely a conversation you want to have with your development team on getting you one field, one attribute, one property that you can latch on to. All right. RANRX record and playback grids and tables. Yes, no problem. The tables were coded using different JavaScript toolkits from vendors. That's no problem at all, John. We can work with that. Can RANRX work with Java? We can work with Java for a system under test, but for the IDE or for the language that it's created in the background, it's either going to create C# or VB.NET, only one of the two. Okay. All right, I'll take one more question here. I record a routine where an inquiry is logged. When I rerun, there is a unique inquiry. How do I manage this? If you could point me to the right direction. Actually, that's Janine that's left. Some technical questions from existing users. Please do contact our RANRX support team. They can certainly be very helpful. Can I test our Ajax application on the latest Safaris on Mac, iOS, Androids, and Android Chrome? We're always looking to improve our mobile offering, so please keep on the lookout for updates to our mobile every quarterly release that we have. Do I have a good tutorial on C# on how to create test scripts within C#? So John, we do have coding examples. If you were just to type in code examples, we give a lot of advanced coding examples that you can just take and incorporate right into your RANRX tests. So we are using RANRX already. We noticed an issue with large tables in our desktop application though. There's a list of hundreds, then RANRX locks up trying to access a line. Yeah, absolutely. We can speed this up. You can certainly have, you can go into turbo mode, but I definitely contact our support team because they can get RANRX tuned to make sure it's working just fine. All right, everyone. Well, right now, that's all the questions I have. I hope I answered everyone. If I didn't, please shoot me an email, and I'll be more than happy to answer. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and look to your email soon for the link to the presentation and to the recording itself. If you have any questions, please let me know. But like I said, I encourage you please to try RANRX for your automation initiatives. I think you're going to be very pleasantly surprised on how much you can get into it. Again, if you don't have programming skills, you can jump into this pretty actively right away. Everyone, have a great day. Have a great morning, great afternoon. We will talk soon. Thank you.